It's a pleasure to be here. Hope you're having a good day so far. We certainly are. My name is Tim Clapham. I'm from Lux. I'm the director at Lux. We're a small motion graphics studio in Sydney. Been here for about 9 years. Been doing this for about 20 odd years, far too long. This is Mike.
Hi guys, my name's Mike. I'm the director of a small studio in Sydney. We're called Never Sit Still. We specialize in 2D and 3D motion graphics with predominantly a focus on the brand side of things. And yeah, I've been working with Tim for the last, pretty much the last year. So we've worked on some great projects and yeah, it's been good times.
If you want to check out our work, these are our websites. This was the biggest thing for us, working out this layout. These are some of the projects we've worked on. We just thought we'd show a few quick stills of some projects. This is from Make It 2016, which we worked on. It was a real privilege to be invited back this year to do it again. And that's what we're going to talk about today, but we just thought we'd run you through a couple of projects. So this was from the event last year.
This was a really cool one. This was another project that we did with Adobe. This was just late last year, and this was for the launch of the Creative Cloud in China. Surprisingly, we were surprised to find out that Creative Cloud didn't exist in China, not as the way that it did as a streaming subscription. So we actually designed this based on an illustration done by Brian Yap. We created this animation to be played at the launch of Creative Cloud in China. So yeah, really great project to work on. And I noticed someone just coming to the room now, Dan Brager. He's been a student from Billy Blue who's basically been working with us, been working with Tim on and off for the last year. So yeah, he was able to work on this one with us as well. So
yeah, Dan worked with us on this, and also this was the project we just completed for the Vivid Opera House projections, which was a pretty mammoth project. Dan helped out with that, and also Alex Barnett, who works for Never Sit Still. Pretty small team. This was a crazy hectic job. We had about 7 weeks to turn this around, 8 minutes of footage. We worked with Spin Effects, who created the rest of the shots, and Ash Bolland was the director. It was a really challenging project and kind of but a lot of fun at the same time.
Yeah, it did have its moments of fun. I think one of the hardest things about this project was rendering. Any of you guys who work in 3D at the moment would know rendering times can just be extreme, especially when each shot of like 15 shots could be over 2,000 frames with handles. So rendering this out at 4K was just yeah, there was a lot of time in that. Yeah,
it was interesting. It was great to see the work on that. Though it's kind of got to be one of the most prestigious canvases in the world. So it was a real honour.
Yeah.
Hello Lux is a little shameless promotion here. So we run Hello Lux, which is like a kind of a sharing tutorial website. We have about 100 free tutorials for Cinema 4D, some for After Effects, Octane, V-Ray, Arnold, some Houdini stuff, and we also sell professional training. I've got some t-shirts to give away later, just to help promote that, but we'll come back to that. So yeah, if you're interested in any training, please visit Hello Lux and see what we've got. Always expanding. Reference.
Before we get into a bit of reference, this was one thing we forgot to mention in our little rehearsal that we did this morning, our run through. But what was interesting about this was when we took on this job, when we spoke to the guys from Adobe, they said, yeah, would it be cool if you guys were to do a workshop on how you made the titles? We said, yep, great, awesome. It wasn't until we caught up to show them our storyboards, probably 4 weeks ago, that they said, about that workshop you guys are doing showing the titles, we don't want anybody to see the titles until the actual day. So we're not going to show you the titles today.
We're not allowed to show you.
But what we are able to do is basically show you a few of the shots isolated, and we've got plenty of exploration, ideation, concepts, and basically demonstrating how we got to where we got to. Starting with some reference.
Sure, yeah, so we were asked by Adobe to kind of create the logo, a little bit of branding. We did all the session titles, and we did some of the designs for the desks, and we designed the logo. This is some of our original kind of mood boards reference, and we wanted to kind of buck the trend a little bit and do things that were a little bit different than a lot of the fashion in this industry at the moment. And we wanted to use some really bold, bright, saturated colours, lots of geometric patterns. These are sort of some references that we were looking at as far as the logo design.
I think what happened when we first started talking, we were leaning more toward that photoreal sort of style that renderers like Arnold and Octane and Redshift are popular for at the moment. And we started actually creating the same gathering the same sort of reference, which is those small little photoreal worlds. But we just looked at it and we just decided, we thought, no, everybody's doing this. We really want to buck the trend. We want to do something completely different. So stay away from the typical titles of now. There's definitely a fashion of opening titles at the moment, so we wanted to stay away from that.
Yeah, there's a lot of those kind of abstract sculptures that people are doing where they've got like cylinders made of wood and then a metal sphere and some glass and some fluffy things. And they look great, don't get me wrong, but we just wanted to try and do something a bit different. One of the things we wanted to do with the titles was kind of blur the boundary between 2D and 3D. We wanted to do a lot of geometric shapes and come back to some kind of raw, just design-based stuff. And these are the kind of things that we were like buzzing by. Like 3D elements that look 2D, 2D things that look 3D. We looked at loads of stuff like optical illusions and all things like that. So the first thing we did was the logo. And this was right back much earlier in the year. And then we kind of left the whole project for ages until about 6 weeks ago when we started the titles. And it took us about 6 weeks, I think, to create the titles. And that was me and Mike pretty much did most of it. Dan Bragger came and helped us out and did one of the shots. Dan is awesome. And also Alex Barnett, he took on one of the shots. But the rest of it, we did ourselves.
What was cool, just a quick thing on this, like a lot of it was to be done, like, one thing I wanted to mention was that we didn't use Cinema 4D Lite or any Cineware, so we really love that. We think that's an awesome tool, but for this we didn't use it, but we certainly used a hell of a lot of Creative Cloud and a lot of Cinema 4D as well. And the way we merged them together, we're going to show you how we use them, but we didn't use that workflow of Cineware with Cinema 4D Lite. So one thing that was cool with my junior Alex is he's only 2 years out of school, and he doesn't use Cinema 4D yet. We're basically training him. He's doing a lot of Tim's training at the moment, but he's slowly getting into it. So he was able to step up and do a shot purely in After Effects, which blended seamlessly into the titles as well.
Yeah, cool. So coming back to the logo, these are some of this is like a whole bunch of like tests and stuff that we did. There were about 5 of us worked on these. So we all kind of like threw our ideas in the pot. And the idea was that we wanted this big, punchy, geometric logo. We were kind of trying to create a metaphor to what the Creative Cloud suite is, which is almost like a whole bunch of different applications that you can bring together to create the toolkit that you want. And it's like modular. You can mix and match depending on your discipline. And it's also a reflection of the community that Adobe have for like the Creative Cloud. So we wanted to sort of reference that as well. So we kind of tried to build all these logos out of these modular parts, but we wanted it fun. We wanted it playful, almost like kiddies' wooden toys. That kind of stuff. So these are some of our early explorations. None of these made the cut, but we just thought it'd be interesting for you guys to see, some of the stuff that we did.
And talking to a design, like making work for a design audience as well, it was one of the places where we could maybe be a little bit more illegible than you could be with, let's say, a corporate client, but it still needed to be legible, especially at a small size. So this was the first concept that we did. We came up with 2 concepts that we actually presented to Adobe. That was after a lot of jamming. And yeah, this was one of them that stuck. So we really liked this based on the building block idea. It felt playful, it felt modular. Again, just to reiterate what Tim said, it was a metaphor for the building blocks of the creative community, the creative community itself, but also all the Creative Cloud apps as well. So we were really liking this one. We put this one forward. Here were some colorways. So really bright and punchy. We wanted this thing to feel energetic. The one in the bottom right-hand corner feeling a little bit different, just so there was choice. And then this was the second concept.
Yeah, and I think the thing is as well is that like when Shavalini Kumar who did it last year, and I think Adobe commissioned her based on the artwork that they found on Behance, and then they commissioned her, and her work was almost like an illustration. And the thing with this, it's not like a classic kind of a mark or a logo that you were doing for a regular client, because it needed to be a little bit more outspoken, a little bit more of a, not that logos aren't thought about, but they're very pure and very simple. And we wanted to create something that was almost like somewhere in between an illustration, rendering, and like more of a mark. So we felt we had a bit more freedom there. So this is the logo that Adobe actually went for. And it's all drawn in Illustrator. And we used Gotham as our kind of starting point, and we based the font around Gotham. And we tended to use Gotham for a starting point for many of the titles that we created in the sequence, which we'll show you shortly. But what we liked about this was the playfulness, the fact that there's all of these separate pieces that come together. And it's a really nice modular approach. We could take this and we could repurpose the colors, and adjust the patterns in Z depth, etc. It exists as a 2D mark, as a 3D piece, because then we could also create different versions of this. And we actually did this for Adobe, and we created this version there's a few different sort of other events that are happening around Make It. There's the local thing, and then there's also an online one. So we created these different marks from the original logo, but because we had this modular approach, it meant that all of the logos kind of feel like they're from the same family, which was really nice. And we took this palette and we used that in all of the other assets and everything that we developed afterwards.
And we felt like this looked, to us, and you'll see it full screen, we felt the vector versions in Illustrator looked really great, but just an extra touch, considering this was, this was the Adobe, this is a design conference, this was Make It, and last year was a very sort of isometric 3D mark. We felt just bringing it into Cinema 4D, like Tim just extruded, adjusted things in Z depth, and then just rendering it with some fast SSS, the fast SSS shader in V-Ray, some global illumination, it just looked really nice in the 3D render. So Adobe were happy with this, and yeah, and we moved forward with the mark done. Just to mention as well, one thing with this, it was a really, really quick turnaround with the mark. Adobe, basically, when they approached us first, they were like, hey, are you guys up for Make It again this year? We're like, sure. And they said, okay, great. Would you want to do the branding as well? Sure. Okay, we kind of need it as soon as you can do it. So we jumped
That's unusual, eh?
Yeah.
We needed it yesterday. Okay, so yeah, that was the logo development. Now the exciting part, the actual titles. So like we say, with the titles, we wanted to create something a bit different. You see there's a huge glut of stuff out there at the moment, which is like really photoreal or very shallow depth of field, nice, intricate type. We wanted to create something that was a bit more outlandish, a bit more outrageous. So we thought we would use this kind of graphic route. We wanted to puzzle people. We wanted to use, we looked at all sorts of stuff, optical illusions. Essentially, animation is an illusion in itself anyway. It's a series of still images, and we watch it and we perceive motion. We wanted to take it to the next level and make it even more ambiguous than that. So
most interesting slide of the whole presentation that you're going to see, the order of the speaker names. What's interesting about this is everyone's looked at the bill, and if you the lineup for Make It. If you go to the front page, you'll see that there's a few international speakers. Mike Alderson was going to be here, and he's still in this list. He's been swapped with Gareth O'Brien from Buck, who was equally excited to see both of those guys. But there's also sort of like Timothy Goodman, who's worked with Jessica Walsh and Sagmeister. He's come over here and he's visiting. So one thing that we thought about was, do we hero those guys? Do we put them as the headliners? Do we put them first, or are they smattered in? Are they sort of like smattered throughout? But one thing that when we spoke to Adobe, they didn't want a hierarchy. They felt that the whole day is an experience and every speaker is an equal. So we just decided on Adobe helped us decide on alphabetical and just alphabetical by first name. So easy done, and we were able to move on with that list.
Yeah, I like it. The fact is that there was no hierarchy there, which is great. And the thing to us as well is that what we decided to do was to take each name and make that the hero of the titles. So we didn't really use any typeface or font. We may have bounced off Gotham to start with, but we actually hand drew each speaker's name. We created artwork for all of them, so each one was unique. Each one could stand alone as an individual piece of animation work in itself. So we essentially made whatever it is, 10 or 11 separate animations, and then we kind of created a journey through these. So I think the next thing on there is our initial boards.
Yeah. But one more thing on this. This was the locked off list, right? Mike Alderson dropped out and Gareth O'Brien replaced them. There's room for typos in the style that we did it, and also there was another speaker, Michael Stoddart, added to the list. So you'll see as we go through what we decided to do, you'll see we were game. But like we said, we wanted to buck the trend and do something different. Yeah,
the problem with that is like you go through all the work and you design your Mike Alderson slide and it takes you 4 days to do all the artwork, and then Adobe go, oh, actually Mike Alderson's not coming anymore. So yeah, and even right up to the last minute, there was I'll tell you about that later.
But we felt this was a good collection.
Yeah,
we felt this was a good collection of work to go forward to Adobe with. So we thought, how far do we go? They've worked with us now. We've got a relationship with them. They trust us. We believe in this work. Do we develop storyboards? Do we get it to the point of an animatic? Or do we just go to them with sketches and concepts and some 3D renders? So that's what we did. So while these are storyboards and there's a little bit of a sequence in place, it was also not a typical storyboard. But we just went and saw Adobe and just talked them through it, and they really warmed to it.
Yes.
Just talking through this?
Yeah, I mean, we won't go through this step by step, but you can see it's very geometric and very graphic, and like Alex Amardo using MoGraph and building it out of lots of separate cubes and stuff like this, and James Noble, we wanted to kind of make it feel quite digital, and these are some more examples of some of the boards that we did. This is very early days kind of thing, but a lot of these ideas made it actually through. Some did, some didn't, some got changed.
Some of them were more finished, more finessed, more complete as far as an idea went. Some of them were more just a raw V-Ray render just to show the link back to the original mark. That was the start of Mike Alderson being built there.
Yeah. Some of them, obviously, quite a lot of work gone into these. And this is just a little quick cut together of some of the reference movies that we'd made, or some quick test renders that we did to show Adobe the kind of thing that we were thinking about, really big, bold graphic shapes. I think it's a 10-meter screen, and we wanted to kind of, induce psychosis into people, that kind of stuff. So yeah, we kind of made all these wacky things. And some of these ideas made it through, some of them didn't. We had a lot more stuff in the pot when we started than we actually used. We cut a load of shots and we refined it all. And the difficulty as well was that, like, all of the pieces are really incongruous. They don't really fit. Like, most pieces have like a style that flows through the whole piece. Ours doesn't. It's just like a whole mishmash that's just kind of been strung together. But like, that was a massive challenge for us, and it was like we went out on a limb, I think, doing that.
Yep. And
also with designing the speaker names.
But then as well, like where we say it is a mishmash and every piece is completely incongruous to one another, every piece is sort of like disparate, well, there's also a link, and that was our job to make this whole thing gel, and we think that it does all successfully gel together as a title sequence. But at first there was a point where we thought it might be all optical illusion-y and that would be cool, and we had time up our sleeves. This was 6 weeks of work to produce, 6 weeks to produce this piece, and I think you and I, Tim, were on it predominantly pretty much full time. So it was time to jam, it was time to explore, it was time to look through books, it was time to play. There was a lot that we were able to put on the table, and there was a lot that we were able to throw out as well.
I think this is like about the only thing that really is, the continuity between it, is that we decided to use the same color palette from the logo, and we decided to base, not all of it, but some of the speaker names on this font, just to try and get a tiny bit of continuity through it. And I think just by using the same colors and materials and the same rendering techniques, that immediately kind of ties all the pieces together. One of the things that one of the things that we decided to do was to also try and kind of create these names in a way that was like referencing something about the person, or perhaps about the discipline that they work in, or maybe a reference to their work, or sometimes it wasn't anything like that at all, and we just used it as a moment for experimentation and to try and create something a bit like outlandish and crazy. So in this example for James Noble, you can see we've got this crazy, wacky type, and it's all built in a procedural way because James works in digital, he works with user interface, user experience, building apps, that kind of thing. So we wanted to kind of represent that in the work that he does by kind of creating something that the computer generated rather than something that was necessarily like crafted by hand.
Tim's actually going to show how he got to that piece for James Noble, and it's actually very it's very procedural and almost computer generated, as opposed to Kitia Palaskas, which was really handcrafted. Because Kitia, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but if you've seen it, she's a craft-based designer. It's all about making things by hand, and it's bold and it's bright and it's playful and it's really fun. But she's a craft-based designer, so we wanted this to have a handmade feel. And even how we approached the animation, we went for a much more traditional animation approach compared to that more procedural approach for James Noble.
Yeah, and Timothy Goodman, this one is different again in the approach that we took because he's well known for his like large wall drawings and these kind of geometric patterns and shapes. So with this, we tried to almost like homage his work. So one of them is a reference to the discipline, one is a reference to the kind of the style of work, and this one is almost a direct reference to the kind of pieces that Timothy would actually create. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go through a few of the shots that we did, and we're going to show you like how we built that, how we tackled the problem, some design decisions, some technical issues. We're going to jump into a few apps and just basically show you our process.
Just jam out for a bit. We're just going to jam out.
We're just going to jam. So James Noble was the first one. We already saw that still, so I'll just bring that up again. And this didn't actually start like this, and I'm not sure, you probably don't remember, but right at the very beginning I showed you the boards, and the one for James looked totally different to this. But as I say, excuse me, as I say, what we wanted to do was create something that was like a reference to his discipline, the digital side of things. And just by saying, we're going to make something procedural, opens doors for you. So I'm just going to actually jump into C4D. And we have a whole bunch of files open here. go. So the first idea that we had was to kind of create something that felt like a bit like binary, a bit digital. And in here you can see I've got a whole bunch of circles, and I've got a whole bunch of cloners, they're all switched off. But if I just come through and enable these, you can see that all I've done is just cloned a bunch of polygons onto each spline. So this would be like the O for noble, for example. I'll just hide these splines. So these cloners are just set up with one polygon in, and they're set up to clone onto the spline with a little bit of this rate, which automatically animates them. So if we press play, you get this kind of cool effect. The thing with this, though, is that, honestly, this was like based on a reference that I'd seen from a poster that I'd seen in a book. But it was based a bit too closely, and like we were a bit uncomfortable with it. So although we quite liked the idea, we thought that, even though we all use reference from other people, everyone is influenced by things, nothing is that original anymore, we were just a bit uncomfortable with it. I thought I'd show it to you even though that was the case, because I'm sure everyone out there sees things, they're influenced by it. But we didn't want to copy something. We wanted it to be a lot more original than that. But we did build we built James out of it, and you can see this is pretty early days. But again, this is built from Gotham, so if I actually just disable these cloners for a sec, and then unhide this, you can see here we've got the J spline, so we're just basically using like the offset path, or whatever it's called in Cinema, to create multiple splines and then clone across all of those. And it just creates this James thing, and then that animates on its own. And then we were like, okay, that's cool, but we're not using that, so we didn't use that one. Let me just stop that playing so it doesn't play in the background. So we decided to go for a totally different approach, and I'm actually going to jump back into Keynote here. So with release 18, I think it was, with Cinema, they introduced this thing called Voronoi fracture. Everyone's like, woo, can smash things up, which is awesome. It's like the most obvious thing to do with the Voronoi fracture is to like explode heads. Or like, these are some test renders that I did with it when they were developing it. I just thought I'd throw them in. Just because they're like the typical thing that people would do, and this is using the push apart effector and the fracture Voronoi. And you've got that classic Voronoi shape. And I think most people, when they look at that tool, that's what they think of it for. And we were thinking, I was thinking, this is cool. Like, what else could we do with this? And if you go to Hello Lux, there's a whole bunch of example files you can download from there of stuff you can do. And one of them actually was a bit of an inspiration for this project. And it's just really simple. So here we've got a cube. And I've got a circle spline. And with the Voronoi fracture, in the sources, you just literally drop objects in. You can drop whatever you want into that field, pretty much. You can put particles in there, shapes, points, paths, MoGraph objects, and then it will take the information from those. And in this example, you can see we've got this option down here to set the point amount. If I enable this circle, you can see that what it does is it creates this cool, just simple geometric pattern on our fracture Voronoi. So we're not creating that classic Voronoi pattern. We're using it to create these geometric shapes, and we can grab this circle spline and move it around, and it will move those fractures correspondingly. So on this scene here, I've just got a simple vibrate tag if we just enable that and press play, and you can see it just vibrates backwards and forwards. So already we're kind of getting this like cool, minimal but pretty cool technique. It feels very procedural. And the great thing about the fracture Voronoi as well is that it works with MoGraph, so you can use it with all your effectors, etc. It also works with dynamics. So in this example here, if I just enable that, you can see now that we have like this, all this animation happening for nothing. We're not doing anything. We're just moving a spline around, and you get all these really nice, like feeling fairly realistic. And you can do that by using this force, position, and rotation. And the dynamics engine's trying to hold those fractured pieces in the same place as they move around. So that's why they're not just dropping down. So this got me quite excited. The next thing that I worked on, or the next example I've got here, is very similar to the previous one, but this time I've got this matrix object. It's set to just add all these matrices around this circle spline, and then they're just animating using the rate at the bottom here. So it's very similar to the circle, and we take our fracture Voronoi and we drop that matrix into the sources, and we can use these points then to generate our fractured parts. So here I've got an extruded object. If I enable this, you can see we then end up with this. Very similar to the last one. But the cool thing with this over the circle spline is that we're working with a MoGraph object. So any of you that use Cinema and use the MoGraph know that you can do anything you want with these matrices. You can make them go bigger, smaller, fly them around, randomize them, color them, all sorts. And all of that will affect how it fractures the object. So there's a big scope for possibilities here. And this next example that I wanted to show you is like a kind of a slightly different thing, but it sort of ties in. And you can see that what we've got here is we've got this crazy pattern. We've just got a cube, that's all we've got. I'm just going to switch these off for a moment and show you what's actually going on here. So in here I've got some motion capture. There's a bit of a trend with motion capture to do stuff made out of cubes and furry things, and it's been going around since Universal Everything did the hairy MTV guy, and it's been a trend for years. There was one really recently, I think Method did it, didn't they? And that was pretty awesome. And this guy's, he's obviously going to work. He doesn't have a very good job. He's not very happy about it. But what you can do with this, and even back to Milk 7, I showed this example. You can get that from John Dickinson, MotionWorks. If you take a tracer object and you drop all the parts from that mocap into the trace link here, and then you can then use that and you use this mode connect all objects, and then it creates a spline for you. So now you've got a spline, you can do anything with that spline that you would. So you could like clone objects along that if you wanted to. But obviously what I did with it is I put it in my fracture Voronoi. So if you look at the fracture Voronoi, we've got that tracer object in there. It acts like a spline, so you can set the number of points, set to 50. If we just hide that and then just enable this, and then you can see, so now we're getting this really weird effect of where it's like, kind of feels almost organic. It's someone walking and it's procedurally creating all of these fractures. I'm like, this is pretty cool, man. How can we use this? I did this quite a while ago, and I'm like, I'm sure one day I'm going to find a use for this. And then this job came along, and then we used it. I don't think that one is really legible as like a person, though. The thing is, if you just saw that and you didn't know, you'd be like, yeah, something feels familiar, but I'm not really sure what it is. Here's another example of something very similar, and this one I think really does like resonate as you can totally see what's going on. So it's exactly the same setup, so I'm just going to press play so you can kind of see it. And it doesn't this is generating a hell of a lot more fragments, so you can see it's really slow. But you can see already that you definitely can see the motion of a person. You can see someone's body moving like this. And it's just a whole bunch of random shapes. I studied fine art, and to me, this is kind of like a real beautiful bridge between like a kind of a total abstract representation of movement and fluidity. I thought it was pretty amazing. If we come back over to Keynote here, I did have a movie of that. And I'm not sure if you can tell what this is, but it's actually someone bowling a cricket ball. So if we just play that again, and like now you know what it is, you can totally see what it is, even though it's just like a whole bunch of random shapes. And I just kind of find that really fascinating. So that's pretty cool. So these are all these things that came together to how we made the James Noble thing. So if we come back into cinema now, here we have the first setup, and here we go. We've got some amazing typesetting in there. Look at that. Not going to win any awards for that, but that's the starting point for it. So if I just hide these, and I've done this exactly the same as the example I showed you earlier. So then I just get some matrices, clone them across the James font. You can see, there we go. They're just moving around the edge of it. And we can drop that into this fracture Voronoi. So all of this logo thing is designed as well from, like, in this example, from like one polygon. So it's just one by one segment on this plane object. If we enable this fracture Voronoi, it looks amazing. Right, there you go. You can't obviously see it because it's all white. If we just bring up our edges, you can see that now we're getting this cool pattern going around. Totally illegible. But at the moment, I've only got 25 matrices being cloned along there. If we put that as 25 per segment, so it's putting 25 onto each letter, then now we get this kind of cool thing. You know, you can almost start to read it. Feels quite good. I feel like we're kind of starting to get somewhere with this now. You know, we wanted a procedural result. I think this is pretty procedural, unless we'd done it in processing or something. So I've just increased the count there, and now you can see that it's actually, like, you can read it, you know? And I don't know how we came up with this. We sort of stumbled into this idea. I thought, well, this is pretty rad. Look, we're going to use this. So the next thing, because this is a MoGraph object, is we can use all the effectors. So the first thing that I did was, like, obviously I need to be able to see it. If I hide the edges, you can't see anything. So I've used a formula effector here, and the formula effector is pretty useful. And this formula that I use on here, I use it for so many things, and I am, tell you, I'm not a maths guy, not at all. Like, I can hack someone else's script, but ask me to write one from scratch, I wouldn't have a chance. But this mod ID2 are used for so many things. All it does is it affects every other clone. That's it. So if you wanted to make a brick wall, you could make it to offset each brick. On this example, I've just set this to use the color mode. So we enable it, it just colors them. One black, one white. So now we've got our like geometric stripes. We've got our procedural approach, we've got the stripes. It's starting to come together. So that was cool. So here we have like just a quick example of what that looks like. It's feeling quite fun. But it's incredible, really. I mean, you know, because it is basically Gotham font, and we're just basically moving objects around the edge of it and using those to fracture a polygon, and then we end up with this kind of crazy thing. It's pretty cool, really. So I was pretty happy with that. And then what I wanted to do was one of the things we did throughout the sequence was, because the name of the person themselves was like the hero thing, so we were kind of going like, you know, Tim Goodman, you know, or Kitia Palaskas, and focusing on the first name and then the second name, and making the name and the letters the hero of the piece. So I wanted to think of a way that I could transition between the different names in James, the different letters, sorry, James. So here's like a basic setup that I use. So I've got these two matrices, and they're doing the same thing as before. This is our little recipe that we've created now, so we're reusing that. They're just there really as containers for that information, for where those matrices are, so we can hide those. And then here we've got another one, and this is set to actually clone across the first matrix object. So it's essentially the first two, the J and the A, are there just as containers for those positions. And then we created this third one, which we could then use to transition between each letter. And it's a fairly obvious MoGraph technique. What we did was use the inheritance effector here, and we've set that to inherit the position of matrix A. So in other words, all of the dots that are on J are going to move to the A. And then if you use this morph motion object, it allows you to morph them from one place to the other. So that's exactly what we did, and we used a bit of fall off on there, and if we enable, you keep seeing it fly up, but if we enable that, you can see that what happens is it just does this morphy thing. And I'm thinking, okay, this could work, this could work. Now let's put this into the fracture, and we're going to find a way of like fracturing between one shape of letter and going into the next one. So here we start with the J, and we press play. You can see the J spinning round. And then we end up with the A. I felt it was a bit snappy, wasn't quite smooth enough, so I just add in a delay effector with some blend mode, and that kind of eases in and out of the positions, so you get a little bit more of a fluid motion. And we ended up with this kind of transition. The other thing I wanted to do as well was just explore maybe ways that we could wipe the letters on and off, that kind of thing. Again, really, really simple once we come up with this technique. So here we've got the E and the S, for example. I've just got a plane effector here. Under the parameters, you can set this to control the visibility. So all it's basically doing is hiding these matrices. And if we drag it across, it doesn't work because A, it's not switched on. Okay, there we go. So then we drag it across. I mean, really basic stuff. But now when we put this into the fracture Voronoi, things start to get really exciting, because what happens is it's like the number of fractures changes, so the black and white flicker all over the place, the letters form and then they disappear. And we're thinking this is a little bit of a cool trick as well. So now if we just press play, you can see that as it comes through, we start to get this kind of crazy, exciting, visual thing happening. And we wanted the whole thing to be fast and snappy and punchy and vibrant, and I think this really ticked a lot of the boxes. So here's my James Noble Final version 2 that I thought I'd bring up. Now, we're really anal about file names, but I thought that would just, everyone's been there. So yeah, we're pretty good about that. So here is like the James Noble from the, that we actually used. But I thought I'd show you this because it's kind of interesting, because the whole thing is set up in one scene. And we've got a few takes in here. And if you don't use the take system, then you really should be. It's such a, like, it facilitates workflow so much. It allows you to keep everything in one scene and switch different things on and off and switch to different cameras, etc. So if you notice in here, we have like a whole bunch of cameras for the different shots. And we can use those takes to jump between them. At the moment, we're just black and white, so what I wanted to do was like introduce some colour. And this just shows another benefit of working with MoGraph as well, because we've got our formula effector, of course, and if we add in some base colour, it all looks very grey. Now, the reason it looks grey is because we're using V-Ray, and in this example, it doesn't, for some reason, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't show you the correct colour, but we know that the different grey values are going to work because the way that I've set this up in this V-Ray advanced material, and just because this is V-Ray, it doesn't matter, this will work with Cinema Standard as well, but the joy with V-Ray for Cinema 4D is that the bridge is so like integrated that you can use your V-Ray material, but in here I've got all my regular cinema shaders. So I've got like a colorizer, a filter shader, and I've got the MoGraph color shader. And they work directly within your V-Ray material, so you can mix and match with V-Ray shaders, cinema shaders. So if you've never used V-Ray in cinema, you can download it, or you can buy it, download it, and then you can just use the renderer. And you can use it with all your cinema materials and all your cinema lights and everything if you want. You don't have to do anything. But if you want to learn all the V-Ray materials, then you can do that as well. So you can like gradually learn it. But you can just open up your regular scene, drop V-Ray in as the renderer, and then it will just work. It's really amazing. So it's a great way to learn a new renderer. Not that there's enough of them out there as it is anyway. So if we just come back and have a look at this, switch off that base color. The formula effector is affecting the color. And if you don't use the MoGraph color shader, then basically the way that it works is it just reads the color of the clone. So if you use an effector like the plane effector or any like shader effector, etc., it will basically give most of the clones a grayscale value. And the MoGraph color shader, all it does is it reads that color from the clone and it allows you to put it into a material. So in this example here, where we've got the formula effector and it's making them black or white, you've got this gradient here. If it's white, it reads it from this end. If it's black, it reads it from this end. And it just so happens that I've actually got black and white at those ends, so I can make it black and white. But if we have a grey value, like if it's 50% grey, for instance, it's going to bring up probably yellow. So it means that what we can do is we can use effectors to make these clones different grayscale values, and then it will pick from that color palette. So we can use one material and we can really experiment with the color that we want to use. And you can see that really clearly if I enable that base color again. And by the way, the base color here is currently set to like 20% gray. If we render it, you can see from that gradient we had before that 20% gray is after the black, it represents the pink part. But if we just grab this color and pull it up and we put it to say 60 or something, then it's going to come out yellow, because that's where that part of the gradient is. So by using an effector, you could think of it almost like, you know, the same as you do with the strength of something. If you're moving it up on position Y and you've got 0% strength, it doesn't move, 100% strength, it goes all the way up. It's the same with this, with the color shader, but it's just black to white instead of 0 to 100. And then you can pick a color from a gradient, depending on the strength. So we thought that was looking pretty sweet. And you can see V-Ray renders pretty quick on this old laptop. You know, it's 4 seconds and you can judge whether it's going to work. It's just in progressive mode, so works in a similar way to Octane and Redshift. It does have a GPU render as well. But what I wanted to do was add some random color to it. So I've got a random effector here, which is just set to color mode, and you can see that under the effector tab, I've kind of animated the seed value just so that it changes a little bit. But I've noticed I've set the minimum and maximum to 90 and 10. That's because on my gradient, I've got the black and the white. So I want to do 10% up, so I don't pick the black, and I want to come 90 down, so I don't pick the white. So I only want to pick from the colors in the middle of that gradient, and that's exactly what this minimum maximum allows you to do. Didn't really want to do the whole thing, but the great thing with the Voronoi fracture is it's MoGraph, so you can use MoGraph selections. So here's the selection that I made. I just went around and painted the different selection that I wanted after a bit of experimentation, and of course these move around with the piece, which makes it pretty interesting. But now if we enable that random color, then we get all of these other colors picked from our gradient in between. And I think doing this just takes it like a little bit to a newer level. And it also makes it so that the type itself is a bit more legible. But yeah, I thought this was like a pretty rad technique. I've never seen anyone do anything quite like it. It really fitted the brief. It feels very 2D as well. It could just be a 2D piece. But you know, we're real gluttons for 3D. We couldn't help it. So just for like every now and then, we decided to just make it 3D as well. So I've got a random effector on here that randomizes the scale. And if we just scrub through, you can notice at some points, like here, it just pushes out a tiny bit. You don't hardly notice it, but it just adds that lovely GI glow around the edges of things. If you cut to like the default camera here, you can see that it actually does extrude them quite a lot. And we could have gone for some really crazy, mad angles and stuff of this, but we really wanted to keep it sort of fairly flat in 2D and just have a suggestion of this. So that was how we kind of came up with the James Noble titles, and what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the just that section of the titles. Yeah, all that for 2 seconds. So yeah, that was cool. So it's funny because that was like a really procedural thing, like we say, to represent what James Noble's discipline was. Whereas the next piece that Mike's going to show you is based on Kitia Palaskas, and she is much more of a handcrafted, artist. But I'll let Mike tell you about that.
Cool, thanks Tim. Awesome, really cool stuff. Hey, we were sitting around Tim's computer and we were trying to come up with something. Tim was trying to come up with a different name and using a different solution, and had used this before and stumbled across it and jammed with that a bit longer. And I came around to him like half an hour later, and Tim was like, "What do you reckon? Worth exploring?" And I was like, "Man, that is well worth exploring. That's rad." So really cool. It was really cool to just see something so procedural just really come alive, almost in a procedural way as well. But on the flip side of that, we wanted this whole piece to have we wanted every different segment to have an original technique. So what we decided to do for Kitia Palaskas, who, like I said, was a very craft-based designer, we wanted to come back and make it feel really handmade and playful and bouncy and fun. So we thought, why don't we just get right into the curves, right into the, every single curve, the position, scale, and rotation, and really basically bring this to life through paying attention to our traditional animation. So originally we thought that we might use a whole bunch of different materials throughout this piece. We were really liking these paper textures. We were really excited by this. These just felt really bold and striking and geometric. As we worked on the piece a little bit more, we felt that they were also, as I mentioned before, so disparate that one thing that might glue them together, one thing that might gel them together is using the same material throughout. So we decided to skip this idea and bring it to life in the traditional animation style instead. Not necessarily frame by frame, because we were doing this in Cinema 4D, but definitely really getting in and tweaking every curve and paying attention to some of the animation principles. These are some of the original design concepts. We were basically bouncing around in this project. When we had Dan in, it was great. We'd grab Dan on a shot, then one of us would pick it up, he'd jump in on something else, he'd explore some color, Tim would jam out with some illustrations, I'd be playing with some 3D, I'd flip it, Tim would kick this to me, I'd work with this, he'd jump onto something else. So it was almost like the way we worked was almost modular. Everyone had a little bit of a touch in something. We were all designing, we were all in 3D, we were all animating. So this was some of the early exploration, and this just felt like, for Tim, it just felt really, really blocked in, and it just felt like for something that was meant to be playful and feel handcrafted, it just felt a bit blocky and restrictive. This stuff was starting to get interesting, but where this really started to come alive was here, especially in this bottom row. You can see these two examples. The baseline is broken, and the composition feels really nice. So we decided to go with this one on the bottom left, and we felt like this was a really good piece to work with. And when I was looking at this, I thought these balls could really basically play a part in how this thing really came alive in animation, these circles. So these were some of the early storyboards. So I was kicking around how this thing was going to come alive. We looked at some different reference, some really nice After Effects frame-by-frame animation, and also some traditional animation as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, but referencing books and looking at some of the old animation masters and how they would approach these things. And I really liked taking the pieces and building the idea of building these obstacle courses, but it just felt a little bit clumsy. This felt a little bit klutzy, a little bit too, just complex for what we were trying to do. So did this. I really liked this. This felt like it filled the frame. This looks like a really interesting and exciting frame, and I thought all these big things they'd grow and they'd knock balls and balls would bounce around. But again, it just felt like I was trying too hard. So I stripped it right back and just thought, well, what if the pieces could act as a little obstacle course? And as the balls bounce and they hit these pieces, they can respond and fall down and knock other pieces and start to form different parts of the name in the shots. We were always thinking in shots, like the last shot, the J into the A, and then the ES, and then back to James Noble, so always thinking in cuts and edits and shots. So I thought, okay, we'll have a bunch of shots, and we'll form part of the name of Kitia, and then we'll form part of the name of Palaskas, and then at the end it can all come together for the final shot before we move on. This was some of the storyboards I started doing. I jumped into Illustrator. I thought, how am I going to block this out? I didn't want to jump into Cinema 4D or After Effects and flounder around because, you know, like if you, like with traditional animation, you've got the straight ahead method, which is most fun for the animator. They just start animating straight ahead and they have a blast. Nightmare for the producer. The producer loves pose to pose, where you block out your shots and then you animate the in-betweens. And obviously you want to get a little bit of a mixture of both, because that's when, you know, usually you'll get the best animation result. So I thought I'll block it out in Illustrator, and I decided to put little curves and arrows in just so I could basically remember what I was thinking, because it was quite, you know, there was quite a lot going on. But it also allowed me to show this animation to the guys, show it to Tim and show it to Alex and show it to Dan and say, hey guys, this is what I'm thinking, this ball will bounce here. So I was able to block it out and get a little bit of a feel for how this was going to come alive. In the bottom row, we can see the Kitia start to form. In the next shot, we can start to see some of the Palaskas. And then in the final shot down on the bottom row, it all starts to come together. We thought about doing this in After Effects, but then we thought it doesn't matter whether it's in After Effects or CD, because we're really only animating position, scale, and rotation. It's more the attention to detail in the curves. It's more like paying attention to animation principles rather than what application we're using. So we thought we'd do it in Cinema 4D, because then we'd have more control over materials, whether we wanted to use straight Luminous channel, whether we wanted to render it with Octane or render it with V-Ray like we were, or whether we wanted to render it with the physical renderer or Sketch and Tune. We had total control. This was the first pass of animation that I did, just blocking it out. You know, still needed a lot more love, and I was pretty excited about this. I thought this is pretty cool, and we sat on it. We're like, yep, great. Let's get it into our sequence. So that animatic that we showed to Adobe, we start fleshing that out, and then we start replacing the animatic with hardware renders once we've got an idea of timing. Then the sound studio that we worked with, who I haven't mentioned yet, who I don't want to forget to mention, so I'm going to mention them now. Smith & Weston Sound. They're based up in Redfern. They did all the audio. Then they flick us some audio that we start playing with. What we realized was once we put this down in our timeline, it just it really lacked energy. It really brought the energy of the whole piece down. So we rethought it, and you know, Tim basically did a bit of a quick edit. We thought, okay, we need to get some of these shots a lot tighter, a lot shorter, and let's ditch one of the shots as well. Let's ditch shot 2. So back to the drawing board, we came up with this, and this was starting to feel really tight. Yeah, this was pretty close to what we ended up going with. So I mentioned before that, you know, it's really important for this stuff to, you know, reference the master animators, the great masters, and look at the principles of animation. And one of those principles is squash and stretch. Squash and stretch basically gives, you know, the idea, it essentially gives volume and weight to an object, gives the illusion of the idea of more life. So we grabbed this out of one of Tim's books that he'd brought in. So I use this as a bit of a reference just for my squash and stretch. It's one of those things that I don't use every day. I do all sorts of different animations. So just had that next to me. It came from this book, The Illusion of Life, on the left. We've also got Richard Williams, The Animated Survival Kit. Both of these are just gifts when you're animating. If you're not familiar with these books, grab a snap, get your hands on them. They're awesome. The Animated Survival Kit is also an app, and it's also a video series as well. But they are just amazing for that traditional style of animation. And just to understand that as animators is really important. So I thought I'd jump into Cinema 4D, show you some of the curves, and have a look at another technique I used to actually get out of that shot. So there was no real, like Tim's first shot, you know, there's quite a lot of techniques, and there's a lot of MoGraph, and there's a lot of, you know, techniques and stacked techniques to get this result. This was just really just pure animation. So we have a look at this shot. This is the setup in Cinema 4D. We've really just got all our objects here in the Attributes Manager. Nothing really too crazy. But if we have a look at, let's say, one of these dots here, we can see that, you know, we've got the motion curve there in place. This falls down, elongated. As it hits that point of impact, we get a little bit of squash. Then we get a little bit more stretch, and then it comes down, hits that next point, comes down with, you know, all in the curves, really controlling those curves. So it's another hard hit, and then just sort of doinks off, misses this piece at the top of the Y, and sort of doinks into place with a little bit of a bounce. This other object here that I'm highlighting, I was a bit heavy-handed on the squash and stretch. I thought, you know what, let's make sure this piece is really nice and playful. So just really going in there and paying attention to every curve. So when you go frame by frame, you can see these letters. You have a look at this L just here. This bounces up. This comes into place, hits that K. That K sort of goes up and rotates a little bit. So just really breathing life into all of these pieces. Let's jump in and just have a look at this curve. You can see I've using all this position, scale, and rotation, but we'll have a look at the Y curve, which was one of the more interesting. You can just see here, you can see exactly what's going on. I was just really jumping in here, just tweaking each individual curve. We work with much bigger monitors at work, so I was able to have the timeline out of the way of the animation and really just get in there and play with that and tweak. So that's how we came up with that shot. One of the bits of finesse that we added in After Effects, so we brought all of our shots into After Effects for a bit of a grade. So nothing really ever comes out of 3D ready to go. Surprisingly, some of these shots did, but we'll always get them in for a bit of comping. And we did all that in After Effects, and we also added motion blur. And we used a plugin in After Effects called RSMB, which is made by Revision, which is real smart motion blur. And I'll show that to you in the final shot. But I also wanted to show you how we segued out of these shots as well. So we just have a look at this eye, the dot of the top eye, the one that's highlighted. What I did on all of the splines that were extruded, I just added a pose morph for all of them. Because I thought what would be cool is if these, and I'll go frame by frame, if each piece sort of was to squash down and squash into place and get really small as little dots and then just pop off the screen. So we can see here, first pose morph moves it down, little pause, then we move in and create that little vertical line, and then we come down into a tiny little square, and then we pop off. So this was a great way for all the shots to just pop off screen and then segue into the next shot, which you'll have to see the titles tomorrow to see what the next shot actually is, because we can't show you the titles as we've mentioned. So that was basically how we did this shot. It was really just a whole lot of keyframing and a whole lot of love for the curves. And just to show you guys where we ended up with that, this was the result. So yeah, that was a lot of fun animating that. So yeah, I'm going to hand it back over to Tim, and Tim's going to talk about some more crazy procedural next level kind of stuff.
That's so cool. It's actually one of my favourite shots from the whole thing. And this was the kind of shot that we were like, please don't change the name.
Yeah, absolutely, that would have been done.
Yeah, so the next one that I'm going to talk about really is another kind of MoGraphy thing. I've got some notes here somewhere. I'm tending not to use them, just rambling. Hope you don't mind. But Alex Amardo is an Adobe guy, and he's the Vice President of Experience Marketing for Adobe. And I was like, oh, what's experience marketing? So I wasn't really sure how to kind of pigeonhole his thing into a style or a discipline. So I just thought, I'm just going to make sure it's an experience to watch. So the original idea that we had, which we showed you earlier, was that we would build his name. Everything's got this sort of geometric thing to it. I wanted to kind of build his name procedurally using MoGraph. Originally we were thinking, we could make it out of lots of small cubes, and we could turn them and change the scale of them. And so what I did for this quick mock-up was I created this artwork. And this is some of my best work. How do I right-click on here? Oh, there we go. So yeah, so just created this simple thing. But what we can do is we can use this. It's just like before where we were talking about the grayscale values driving the color. You can use the grayscale values of anything. It's a bit like doing displacement. You could use this to displace a surface. So the brighter it is, the further it pushes it away, like a displacement map. You're probably familiar with that because you can do it in After Effects or in Cinema. Or you can do it with MoGraph using the shader effector, and you can do it to control any of the parameters that you want, really. So in this example here, I've got this set to control the scale on Y. So if I just enable that, you can see whether we get this line. And we were thinking we would come out of the previous shot with loads of horizontal lines, and then the lines would kind of go brrr into low, a whole bunch of them, and then it would reveal the name. And this is what we presented to Adobe. And then I just think, it's a bit lame. It's a bit MoGraphy, everyone's kind of seen this. But I kind of like the idea of using these textures and using this to control the cubes. And it's still going to feel very geometric. So decided to kind of explore this and come up with something a little bit different. Wanted to create something that, again, was just some people hadn't necessarily seen, and it was maybe a bit crazy. I think they let us loose on this, and I don't think Adobe realised what we were going to do. So like, I thought, I know what, how about if we just take a cube? Notice that everything I do starts with cubes. The cube. Drop it in a cloner. Got all these different colours on it, all from our colour palette. So essentially what we've got here is we've got like a screen. It could be like a whole bunch of pixels. So you could think of each one of these cubes as a pixel. And that's exactly what I thought we could do. So we've got the different colours on different sides. So if we rotate them around, then we're going to show the different colours. So first thing here is just a gradient on a shader effector, and it's set to rotate them 360 degrees on the heading. So of course, where we have black in our gradient, on the left, they don't rotate at all, and then on the very end, then they've rotated 360. And all the values in between, they rotate the arbitrary values. So that's not the result that I wanted, really, but it's really easy to fix. If you just take that gradient and then you drop it into a colorizer like this, then what you can do is you can take any input and then you can posterize it, basically. So I posterize that, and I've got these different values here. So this is 0, this one's 25, this one's 50. So if you think that the amount we want to rotate is 360, if we rotate it 25% of that, then we're going to rotate it 90. If we rotate it 50%, we're going to rotate 180. So by using a posterized gradient like that, what happens is that they all rotate 90 degrees. So this is cool. Thinking, okay, so we can use this to draw pictures. We can draw pictures with these pixels that are really cubes. You know, and I'm not sure it's like that original. Like a lot of people have used this. It's kind of pretty cool. But like, let's just show you another example. And here we've got like a checkerboard. And these are just some quick tests that I put together for this presentation to sort of show the principle. Fairly simple, but this checkerboard pattern is animated, just the number of pieces. And you can see as we play through, it animates on the thing. But what's actually happened, it's not really animating. They're just rotating. But because they're rotating at 90-degree increments, you don't see them rotate. But they are rotating. And that was like where the cool thing started to happen. So we're like, okay, how can we show that they're rotating? So what we did was we took that exact same setup, and in here we've got a cloner, I've got a checkerboard thing. But this time we've added in the delay effector, and I'm using it on blend mode again. And the blend mode allows you to like ease in and out of these different positions. So if we enable this blend mode, then what happens is that as it rotates, we see it ease in. So you can see now we start to get this result. It starts to become a little bit more interesting. And then you can just adjust the strength here. So if you want it to be fairly snappy, you could do it like this. And if you set it up really high, then it's almost like the ease is so slow that they don't ever really stop moving. So you can start to create these interesting patterns. And you know when you're in a shop and they've got those like moving message boards and it says words going across and everything, it's kind of like that idea because they're essentially just different dots switching on and off. And that's kind of what we were doing here, but with rotation. And I think by adding in that delay, takes it to like a whole new level. I can't remember where I am in these slides, but oh yeah, there we go. So I didn't even show that, did I? So this was kind of where we got to with it. Again, using the palette. Then we jump over to the bit that I just showed you. So the thing is with it is that, like, if you think of each clone, each cube, it could be any object at all. They could be cars that are all different colours. It could be anything you want. But each one is like essentially a pixel of a television screen. So you could go into Illustrator and make a square and then duplicate that square. However many you've got, say you've got 16:9, so you've got 16 by 9 cubes in your cloner. You could then go and create 16 squares in Illustrator and 9 down, and then you've got a grid, and then you can paint on that grid, you know? But I was like, an easier way to do it is to just use 1 pixel for the dot. So if we've got a 160 by 190 cloner, we create a file that's 160 by 90 pixels. And that's what this GIF here is. This is actually just a tiny GIF. That's the artwork that we used for it. We just blew it up so you could actually read it. And the cool thing about this is that it's so easy. You just scale it up in Photoshop and you can just paint the pixels. You see the pixel grid, you can just paint them. It means that the file size is really small. That's like, I don't know, very small. Less than 1K kind of thing. So I can do a 1,000 frame animation. It's going to be less than a megabyte. So I can create an image sequence like that. And then like when I'm saving it and doing my backups, when I'm like rendering on my render farm and I have to save that image sequence, just like that. It's really cool for that reason as well, not only apart from the fact that it's easy. So what I did was jumped into After Effects. And this is the first animation that I came up with, just a really simple type on. I just wanted to test it out and see if this was going to work. So you think about it, when it's white, it's going to rotate these objects 360, or I think I set it to 270, and when it's black, it doesn't rotate them. So they're going to, as it flashes on and off, the cubes are going to be spinning backwards and forwards like this. So this was one of the first tests, and this is done with a cloner. I can't remember what they are. It's like 96 by 54 or something. And you can see that this is the kind of result that we got by using that previous image sequence on our cloner object. And it's literally just rotating those cubes around, and you kind of end up with this like crazy result. Everything I did, I was trying to do something a bit wacky, I think. And this next one is, so the next one, this example is the same thing, but I zoomed in a bit closer. And then what I did was I took, because we just got a shader effector there, with that image sequence loaded in, it's just flipping the things around. Then I thought, how about if I just take another shader effector and use the same image sequence, but this time flip them on this axis. So I've got one of them doing this, one of them doing this. If I offset them in time so they happen one after another, you're going to get this staggered sort of thing going on, like this. And we were kind of buzzing off this. We were thinking, this is pretty cool. This is like, what have we done? So yeah, I just want to show you in After Effects. This is a cool example of like using After Effects and Cinema together as well. If we just come over to After Effects, you can see here I've got like these two comps. And they're very similar. But notice we're at 800% there. If we just go down to like 100%, then that's pretty much, the animation. That's the kind of thing we were working with. And it's important to note as well that all the layers are set to draft mode. Because otherwise, like when you add all like fractal noise, and I've used some awesome effects in here to do this, including Venetian blinds. Woo! Fractal noise. Fractal noise is just like, we use noise for everything. But the cool thing about this technique is it's sort of kind of procedural, but if we have a look, you can see that actually there's a lot of keys. They're all whole keyframes, but I still went through and keyframed all of these elements. And this was like a process of going into After Effects, doing some animation, seeing what it looked like, bringing it into Cinema. Because you can't really tell in here. You've just got this funny little grey thing. But you know that they're going to be turning different colours. And you know that it's going to, hopefully it's going to look kind of cool. So yeah, that we set that up. I did two. They're very similar. Rendered these out. And you can see that we're getting all of these mad results. So this was an example of what that looked like. I think this is just a hardware render still. So now we've got all of those noise patterns, and we can use those to kind of create different blocks of color, almost like a very glitchy animation. But I did actually design it to be like that because the fractal noise, we're using the low quality, the cell setting. I still had to move it and offset it. I didn't want any of the lines going through the type. It tended to break up the letters so they became illegible. So I ended up with this kind of fit-inducing thing. And this is, like the one in After Effects is a little bit later. You can see on this example, let's just watch that again, that I've got this craziness at the beginning and then it kind of settles down and it becomes a little bit, a bit tamer. I just want to show you that in Cinema. I mean, that's pretty much how we did it. But I have this scene here. So I use takes in this as well. I use takes pretty much for everything. So here's my cloner. And you can see that I've got the different colors on the different sides. It's nice as well with these really simple objects in cloners, so you can kind of up the old count, 96 by 54. So my resolution was 96 by 54 pixels. And we're using render instances as well, which is going to save on memory, make everything a bit faster. In this scene, we've got like a bunch of different shots. So what we did was we output like those hardware renders like you just saw, and we've got a few that are from various points of view, like the close-up, to reveal maybe the beginning of the name, and then a midpoint. So we can see the whole of his name, and then the wide shot. And we output all of these as hardware renders. We pull them out as MP4s, just straight to I just render straight to H.264 out of Cinema as a QuickTime or MP4, and then bring them into Premiere. You can do your cut really fast until you get the shot that you want. And when you know you've got the shot that you want, you can just render it with a few frame handles. Because obviously we don't want to be rendering like 220 frames of every shot at full HD with GI and subsurface scattering. We really only want to render the frames that we've got because we've got another like 12 shots to do. So you can see in here I've set up all of these render settings. And for those of you that don't use this like child-parent render setting, it's really cool. It's like you can set up your parent render setting here, and you set up what resolution you want it to be, your frame rate. You can set up, we're using V-Ray here, but you can set up all your settings, your anti-aliasing, blah, blah, blah. And then all of your child render settings, these ones down here, they just inherit everything. So the only thing that I change in these child ones is I just say, well, this shot is this frame range, this shot is this frame range. And it means that I don't have to have like loads of separate render settings and keep them all in sync, because the only one you really change is the top one. If you want to change your anti-aliasing, you change the top one, and it changes all of them. So if I wanted to do all these render settings as H.264, I just literally drag them into my H.264, and they'll use all of those output settings. But they'll maintain their frame range. And you can see that the word frame range is from and to is in bold. That means it's unique to that render setting. But if they're in normal, like if I come in here and go inherit parent setting, it goes back to normal, and now it's using the one from its parent. It's a really cool little thing, and you can do the same thing with takes. I'll just undo that. So what that meant was that we could build the whole thing in one scene, and if we come to these takes here, in fact, hold on, let me just come up and select this cloner, and you can see I've got all these effectors for the different shader effectors, for the different two different sequences, and then we've got the different cameras. But the take system allows you to then say, okay, with this one, I want to switch these effectors off. You can override it, and then you can go to the mid setting, and you can say, these are the effectors that I want. And on that one, these are the effectors that I want. So you don't have to have separate objects and separate scenes for all the different permutations. You just use the take system to enable and disable different parameters, which makes things much easier, you know? So if you change the lighting in this scene, you haven't got to change it in 4 other places. It's just going to work. So you can see that we ended up with yet another crazy MoGraph solution, a little bit unusual. So let's just take a look at what that craziness looks like. There you go. So yeah, so that was cool. So I'm going to hand it back over to Mike. He's going to talk about the next one, awesome. Which actually used like a kind of similar technique, but in a totally different way.
Cool. Cheers, Tim. Yeah, it was a really, really, really cool result. And like some of these shots took days to crack. That one I think was, honestly, I think that one was like pretty much cracked in a day. That came together really quickly.
The basic idea.
Yeah, it was just, that just felt like a really successful shot. From the time that Tim really sort of started playing with this spinning cube technique and getting the delay in there, it just started to feel really fresh and exciting. And yeah, I remember it coming together really quickly. So that was a little win there. That was a great shot. And also just really cool to see the process, and really cool to see, this is one thing, like having worked with Tim for a year, I've got to be honest, it's really, really, really pushed me, you know, like the technical has been, you know, at times quite challenging, but it's great to see just Tim at the level he is really, really trying to push. So something looks too MoGraphy, if something looks too, like it's been done before, okay, let's push this, or let's layer it up, let's stack some effects, let's get this looking interesting and unique. And I think that's really important when you're trying to create really original and exciting work. So basically, John Barry, a little bit about John Barry. Actually, we don't know too much about him except he's a video guy. He's actually the Pro Video Strategic Development Manager for Australia and New Zealand. So if you guys are, probably a lot of you guys are into video. John's pretty prominent on forums, on like Creative Cow and stuff, and writes blogs for Adobe. So John's going to be speaking tomorrow, like all these guys are. So this was actually the style of shot that we came up for John. And what we thought would be cool is to have a whole bunch of rotating triangles, keeping with our geometric theme. John didn't reference his discipline necessarily, but more just keeping in line with our geometric theme. We thought it would be good if a whole bunch of triangles flipped, and as they flipped, they cycled through a bunch of colors, and they ended up revealing a different color or a different triangle, or flipping triangles, or revealing John's name. So that was the base of the idea. So I kicked around a few concepts. We kept with the 96 wide, the 96 across by 54 down for our pixel grid, or our grid array. And the reason being is that just seems to fit really seamlessly into our full HD frame of 1920 by 1080. So I blocked out my type, basically, you know, just in Illustrator, it blocked out the squares that I wanted that the type to live in. Started playing with some colors like monotone. I thought this was interesting. Duotone, I thought this was looking kind of cool. I really liked the shadow technique. This was starting to look interesting with a bit of color with these shadows, more colors and shadows, and then duotone with the shadow as well. So we thought, cool, it's got legs. Let's roll with this and start getting this rig built for Cinema 4D. So MoGraph is one of those things, there's a lot to it, and some of the stuff we reach for a lot, cloners and fracture objects and plane effectors, and there's stuff that we don't use at all. And one of those things, for me anyway, is a Mo instance. So the Mo instance is one of those things I've never reached for before, and Tim suggested and said it might be a cool thing to try. Tim also said it's not one of those things he uses a lot, but essentially what Mo instance is it creates, you give it a reference object. So in this instance, I just gave it one of those triangles, and then what it does is it basically creates an echo. So any movement on that instance will basically be echoed, and you can echo it as many times as you want. In this instance, I had 10 echoes on it. So basically that's how it works. If you remember the old Windows computers, as you moved a mouse around, it would create a bit of a mouse trail. So that's how Mo instance works. It's a little bit like Dynamics in the sense that you have to play it from the start. You won't see a motion if you just move around and play it halfway through. You won't see those trails. It gets a little bit confused. But if we play it from the start, you can see here in a grid of 7 by 4, that's a history depth of 10 for each clone. You don't really get smooth playback, and this is not 96 by 54, this is 7 by 4. So it's feeling pretty heavy, but still we can work with it. We're used to working with heavy scenes, as long as they're manageable. We've got a cloth surface here to add a little bit of thickness. We're not using the cloth for anything else except a little bit of thickness on the cloner. And so we thought, okay, we've got a bit of an idea here. This is feeling pretty cool. So let me show you this in real time. This is a very early V-Ray test as well, just using a bit of subsurface, pretty noisy, but we're feeling it. So there's something in this. So that was feeling pretty cool. We thought, okay, great, we've got a technique that's working. Let's get a few shots, and let's reveal the name in there as well. So this was another test, a few cuts, was feeling pretty energetic. And we sort of sat with this. We thought, okay, the name's not working perfectly, but we can come back and fix that. Let's roll with. Came back sort of a few days later, and to be honest, we just weren't that satisfied with it. Just quickly on this as well. Again, a 96 by 54, tiny little Photoshop pixel map, and then blown up, just so you can see the grids and where we pointed John Barry. That was how we were revealing that name, putting that into a shade effector driving the rotation, and revealing that section of the name. But we just weren't happy with the movement. The Mo instance basically creates a history depth, and we weren't able to use in the Mo instance like every second clone, or it just wasn't giving us the movement that we wanted. We really wanted a really natural sort of flipping triangle, and we just weren't getting that. We didn't really have good control over the curves. You could control the spline, but we didn't have good control over the curves. So we sniffed around online, and we found this tutorial by E.J. Hassenfratz, also known as iDesign. He's a great Cinema 4D animator, involved with the guys at Grayscale Gorilla, does lots of great stuff for Sketch and Toon and just cinema in general. And he had a really cool approach that we thought we'd give a try. So his technique was basically to use a step effector. Let me just jump into Cinema and show you. To use a step effector to drive the rotation. So rather than using a Mo instance, using a step effector. So we gave it a go, and we thought this was feeling pretty good. You've got the step effector here, that's this step rotation down here in the cloner. And that's driving the rotation, it's driving the heading of the rotation. And in the min-max settings of the effector, it's in the min-max settings that we're able to affect that curve. So this was feeling pretty good. This was feeling much more natural and much more interesting and exciting than the Mo instance. So we thought, okay, great, we've solved it. So that tutorial was really useful. Thanks, EJ, awesome. And here it is. We're getting reasonable playback. It's slowing down a little bit. And I thought, well, this is going to be pretty heavy in 96 by 54, but we can live with it. The only thing was, when we did put it into that grid array of 96 by 54, we couldn't even use the computer. And the reason for that is with this method, we weren't able to use render instances. And also, you'll notice here where the step rotation is. The step rotation is in the null that's then being cloned 96 by 54 times. So if I turn that on so you guys can see it, the effector, obviously, as most of you guys would know, is the yellow there. So you can see how many effectors there are in there and how many times they've been cloned. So the computer just completely buckled. So we thought, okay, well, we've got to rethink this scene because we really liked this technique. We felt like we were getting somewhere. We liked the natural movement. We'd had our name reveal sorted out. So we stripped it right back. We stripped out the guts completely. And we came up with this solution where we really simplified it. There were 2 cloners in the last scene. Now there's just 1. There's 6 clones in the cloner, and we used a radial cloner. And then we just used start end angle on the radial cloner. We didn't need an effector to drive that rotation. So that simplified it greatly. You can have a look here. Same motion. We had pure total control over that curve. We realized that the piece going around, the polygon, the triangle going around the back, we weren't going to see that. So that didn't need to be in a cloner. We didn't need that to have however many clones we wanted. We had total control over this. If I bump this up, if we wanted it to have 12 pieces, you can pump that up and see that now we've got 12 pieces, and it's still pretty light. So we were happy with this. If I pop it into the grid of 7x4, you see almost instant playback. So this was feeling pretty good. We felt like we'd solved this. And to be honest, when we did drop it into that grid array of 96x54, it was slow, no doubt, but it was manageable. So by stripping out the guts, by using render instances for better use of memory, we were able to come up with a solution that basically allowed us to create a scene that we were pretty happy with and that we were able to use. Now that we'd built this rig, we'd spent quite a bit of time sort of solving this. We wondered whether we were going to use some 3D angles. None of these we ever got right, but we could have finessed this a little bit more. But coming back to that purity of that idea, we really liked what we'd come up with. We liked the idea that we were blurring the lines between the 2D and 3D, so we didn't just want to give those 3D angles just to force it. We wanted to stick to the purity of that idea. So this was, actually, I did at one stage think that maybe I might generate that rotation in the shader effector using basically a gradient that I generated in After Effects with some fractal noise on top. You can see the map that I set up here, again, a black and white map, white being rotating, but this just felt way too, you could see the noise in this test. So that was on the cards for a little bit, but you could see the noise, so we killed that, and this was the final result. Okay, we've got. Do we have time? Tim had another one line. Tim could talk about Cinema 4D for the rest of the hour.
Cool. Right. Well, I might have to go a bit quick because we have like 12 minutes. But yeah, so this one, Michael Stoddart. Okay, so this was the design that we came up with for this one. It's pretty rad. It's funny really because we're like the guy before Michael Stoddart. There's a story behind that as well. Is that it was Mike Alderson, because we used the first names for the alphabetic, and like Mike Alderson from Man vs. Machine, like we wanted to kind of homage some of his work, and one of the things they did was 4:7, and they had this really cool technique where they used a camera around a corner, and it's like these 2 corners, and they have like different landscapes or different environments on each corner, and we thought that would be a really nice segue to transition out of Man vs. Machine, and then Michael Stoddart was next, so we were like, yeah, cool, well, we'll build his name on a right angle, and we used a font originally and laid it up like this, and then we ended up building it as a 3D piece. And then, of course, Mike couldn't make it, and Gareth O'Brien stepped in, but we were like, oh man, we like this, we're keeping it. So Gareth's piece ends with an homage to Man vs. Machine, which is funny, but that's the way it goes. So yeah, we built this, and it was, this was a very design-driven piece. It wasn't really that techy, and I did it all in Illustrator. So I drew it in Illustrator, and here you go. You can see. And what I've done is I created a whole bunch of rectangles, basically, and then brought those into Cinema. I'm just going to jump into Cinema. This is a kind of a cool little trick as well. Have I got it open? No. There we go. Okay, so there you go. So it's just basically bring them in as splines, extrude them all, and then whack them into 2 pieces and put them at right angles. And if we just jump off here and have a look, there you go, you can see the kind of thing. So pretty basic to build. It just takes a little bit of time to draw it all and get that right. But what I noticed at this point was when I got it in my camera rig and I just kind of rotating backwards and forwards, you notice that we've got this problem. Obviously, we've got these pillar box areas to show us our render safe zone, but up in the very top corner in the bottom, we've got like a gap. And then as it rotates around, we've got another gap there. So I realized at this point that the artwork that I'd done really wasn't going to be sufficient. So I came back to Illustrator and made it a bit bigger. And we also made it a fair bit wider. And the thing is as well, is we wanted it to come from the piece before, so we had to build all of the pieces from the previous shot into a transition into Michael Stoddart, and then out of that and then into the next one. So I ended up building this thing in Illustrator, which I just switch it all on, and you can see that it became this like mammoth amount of paths that we had. So we start off here with Gareth O'Brien, and then the idea is that there's an edge here, and then we transition into this, so the lines change to this thinner line, and then we come to Michael Stoddart, and then we come across, and then this is the beginning of the final, or the very first part for Nicole Tong. So it's a matter of taking each piece of that, and just to keep it manageable, because you can imagine there's like hundreds of, I mean, it's not like it's just like the average day, but yeah, it's a lot of paths to deal with. Bring them all in one go, and they come into cinema, and they're just called path 1, path 2, and it'd just be a nightmare. So basically, put them all on separate layers here, so that I could then output, just this section, bring that in, set that up, put it in a null, bring the next one in, put it in a null, and then each one arrange them around the cube. And I think there's 7 sides to the cube, so we had to overlap. So that was pretty much how I built that. And if we come up and have a look, and you can see this is like the next shot. I've got this in a fracture now, and there we go. And you can see now that where I've built the extra part, it all fits, and it's looking nice. Because of course we couldn't really push into that because we would have ended up like ruining the composition. I've actually got some animation on this one. So as it comes round, it's an early one. Not enough time to read it. We're like, well, yeah, they don't need to read the name. It looks cool. So we've got this in a fracture. If we enable that, and then I've got like a plane effector here, and that's just got some light fall off. So as it comes round, it kind of like the fall off animates. Typical kind of MoGraph thing. Wasn't really that happy with it. Tried it with some random weight on there. Just if you put that random weight, like the random effector has got this parameter weight down here, it just kind of adjusts the amount of influence that any chorus or any effectors afterwards in the list. So you put that before, and then it breaks it up. It just makes it feel a little bit more organic. Still not that happy with it, really. Wanted it to, wipe on as it came round, feel a bit more natural. One of the other things about this as well is that you can see that all of the pieces are kind of scaling up from the middle. Just feels a bit MoGraphy. MoGraph is an amazing tool set for like creating things really quickly, and without the help of Illustrator, there's no way I'd want to draw all this in cinema, so, but like you can see, one of the problems here is that when we come around the back, we've got the back part of it, and we don't want to see that. So I had to sort of build a solution to this. So what I thought we could do was like just position the axes in different places. I wanted to just show you like a quick trick here for that. So here's like an example of what I did was I brought in each Illustrator thing, split it into the horizontal and the vertical splines for each section, and then for the name. So what you can do, for instance, like you can do this really quickly as well. So if I kind of come in here and and just kind of grab half of these, and then bring up axis center, which is a great little tool for repositioning your axes. I can then say, I want all of these at the Y -100, hit execute, and you can see they've now dropped the axes down to the bottom of all of those. If we come down to this one, we can go Y 100, +100, and execute, and they're all at the...
I don't think I had selected.
I only got one selected, look. I don't know where it was. Oh. Shift key. Yeah, like so. I might have missed one then, but anyway. So yeah, you can do all that, and then you can kind of select them all, and I don't know if you guys use the naming tool as well. So that was like, should have been only 2 clicks really, but because I'm not very good with keyboards. So these are called splines, so we can call this, take spline, replace it with make it, and then you can put a token after it as well, $N, which is handy, and then if you hit replace name, it then creates a numbered list for you, which is cool, because these are all going to be like either animated or in MoGraph, so they all need unique names. Then what you can do, because now we've got the axes in the right place for these objects, you can see that one's at the bottom. Now if we add in like an extrude and we select everything, just deselect that, and we drop all these in, the extrude object's got a really cool little feature that not everyone knows about. It's worth knowing. It's got this hierarchical checkbox here, which allows you to like extrude the full hierarchy of every spline within that object. But the cool thing about the hierarchy checkbox is not that it does that, it's that if you press C or you make that editable, which is just another click, then you get all of your extrudes as separate objects. Not only that, it takes the axes from each object, so it's in the right place, and I've got a separate extrude, and it's taken the name from each spline. So I just renamed the splines, and now it's renamed all the extrudes for me, which is like, well, super handy. So if I just delete that, what I'm going to do is just put this into a fracture, and then Shift-G, ungroup that. So now I've got it in a fracture object, I can add in a plane effector, just as a, well, maybe I can't. like so. We're just going to set this to scale down. This is the best bit about it, the uniform scale -1. So I've done all that, and I'm like, awesome, this is great. And now the fracture object like resets the axes into the middle. So yeah, that was great. But I'm like, how can I solve that? How can I get rid of that? There we go. So yeah, but what you can do instead is you can just, I used a script for this, and you can get this one from Cineversity, but I use scripts all the time, and I'm rubbish at writing them, and I always find everyone else's and then sort of pitch and patch them together or ask for help, and then eventually, because you think about this is only, what is it, 130? I had like 700 of these, and I'm like, how about if I put it in a null? Then it'll work. Let's just put 700 objects into nulls, and that's why scripts are so handy. So yeah, I can just come in here and just go group each, boom, and then it puts them all in nulls. And now my plane effector will do its stuff, and it will work correctly. And now you can see that they're all scaling from the correct point, from the top or the bottom. So I did that for the left and right ones. That means that now when my plane effector comes in, they're all going to scale from one end. But of course, in this example, they're still scaling up. They're kind of going whoop like this. So what I wanted them to do was kind of go whoosh, whoosh, if that makes sense. There's only a room like this that you could get away with doing that. And I haven't got it open. And the last one. This is actually the scene that we used. And yeah, and here you can see that, like, when I do it now, as it comes round, like, there's a plane effector in there if we fold this down. So you can see what I did was split it out so that I've got, like, each, like, the left side, the right side, the Michael Stoddart name, the Michael Stoddart vertical and horizontal, and left and right for both. So we ended up with, like, however many it is, 8 fracture objects. And each one of these has got its own set of effectors, but it just means that the first effector there is just set for the X and Y, so it just does the kind of the base of the cube, and it's got a very small fall off, so it kind of pops on, and then the other one's longer, and then it just kind of goes, so you get this effect kind of thing. So you can see all the little dots as they appear, but it's just a little bit more interesting than they're just all scaling up uniformly from the middle, and I think it's those kind of little details that if you add them in, that make the difference. And in this one, you can see, this is an interesting fact as well, you can see his name is Michael Stoddart. But if we come back to this one here, his name's Michael Stoddart. So yeah, on Sunday, Adobe called me and said, oh, by the way, you spelled Michael's name wrong. So that's the joy of doing everything, like manually designing it all. So yeah, that was a last minute re-render. Yeah, so we got that one out.
That was set to be the first day off in, I think, like 15 days.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm working Sunday again. And yeah, and this one doesn't use any takes, even though I said we do use takes, but it does use layers a fair amount. And where are they? There we go. So you can see here, and this is the whole scene. And I'll just unhide that. So the way that we set this up was that, yeah, if I like just pull back, you can see that there's the Gareth O'Brien. So that's how Gareth O'Brien one ends. And we're not talking about this one, and you haven't seen this one, but kind of based his one on the Buck logo. Yeah, and this kind of comes round, and then it does the in-between bit, and then it comes round, then we see the Michael Stoddart, and then it comes round and boom, into the next shot. And if we look at it from above, you can see that we have like a whole bunch of, like most of them are hidden actually, but we set up lights. There's a few effectors in that one. We set up lights for each shot. Because if you think about it, you've got one on one side, and then as you come around the other side, your next name is this side. The lights at the back here aren't really going to be very good. So we had to basically set up a separate set of lights for each shot. And we just use, on the lights, we use the include, exclude. If you select the light and have a look under the project tab, you've got this include option, which is cool. It allows you to include only those objects within that null. So we could then light each individual side and not worry about it affecting anything else. And each of these has got these effectors that kind of wipe all the pieces on, and then they've got these other effectors here that wipe the pieces off. So as we come in, and you notice the camera's sort of rotating around, as it comes around, then that effector just moves and wipes that bit off there, just as they come outside the camera cone. So then we didn't get them around the back of, we couldn't see them around the back. And that was my quick, how we did Michael Stoddart. Stoddart. And that's a render that we're not going to look at. And this is the shot. So thank you for coming, everyone. Awesome.
Well, man.